At 2 hours GMT, you're listening to the Newsroom from the BBC World Service. I'm Rich Preston with the latest news live from London. As President Trump visits parts of California ravaged by deadly wildfires, we hear from residents bearing the brunt of the disaster.
If you want to understand what we're going through out here, you gotta be here.
All across California, fires are burning us up and these people need help.
Argentina says it won't be able to retrieve a submarine that's been found at the bottom of the Atlantic a year after it went missing with 44 sailors on board.
A little disappointment. Disappointment because we thought they had other information. We had the illusion they would find them alive. But hey, that's it.
Protests against fuel prices in France have left one person dead. Organisers blame the government. And one of the world's most famous cartoon characters turns 90.
Hi, everybody. It's me, Mickey Mouse.
That's all coming up. You're listening to the Newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Rich Preston. We begin in Venezuela, where the challenge to President Maduro's rule is being mounted on multiple fronts. Massive anti-government rallies took place in the capital, Caracas, and a senior general, Francisco Yanez, broke ranks and pledged his allegiance to the self-declared interim president, Juan Guaidó. We'll hear from our Americas editor in a moment, but first, this report from our correspondent in Caracas, James Reynolds. It's just gone 2 a.m. Sunday here in London and just after midday in the Australian state of Queensland, where exceptional monsoon rains have caused severe flooding, described as a 1-in-100-year event. Up to 20,000 homes have been flooded in the coastal city of Townsville, and residents are being evacuated on rafts. The Queensland Premier, Anastasia Palaszczuk, warned residents not to underestimate the dangers.
The next 24 to 48 hours are crucial. When we use the words unprecedented and uncharted, we use this for a reason. We have not been in this scenario before. There has been a lot of rain that has been falling, especially over the Townsville catchment, and some of these levels are unprecedented.
The BBC's correspondent in Australia is Phil Mercer, who joins us live on the programme now. Phil, there are fears over a local reservoir and floods that are expected to get worse.
Yes, we've had more heavy rain in that part of Queensland. Thankfully, the authorities say that those torrential downpours have managed to dodge Townsville's main reservoir so far. But the Bureau of Meteorology here says that intense rainfall is again developing over Townsville. This is a city of 175,000 people, about 1,300 kilometres to the north of the state capital, Brisbane. And just to the north of Townsville, half a metre of rain has fallen on the town of Ingham in just 12 hours. So unsurprisingly, this unprecedented weather event is known here as the Big Wet.
And elsewhere, reports of severe droughts, Phil.
Well, here in New South Wales, Australia's most populous state, 99% of the land is officially in drought. It is hoped that this wild monsoonal rain that the people of Queensland are experiencing could well help parched areas to the west of Townsville. Further south in the southern Australian state of Victoria, an emergency warning has been issued for a popular tourist destination, a place called Hepburn Springs. This is northwest of Melbourne as firefighters in that part of Australia battle more difficult weather conditions. We've had the hottest January ever documented in Australia, and 2018 was Australia's third warmest year on record. So floods in the north, wildfires in the south, and it's been pretty warm elsewhere too. So once again, Australia is a land well used to nature's extremes, but once again, nature has shown that it can shock and surprise people across this very, very big country.
Phil, thanks very much for joining us. That's the BBC's Phil Mercer in Sydney.
He could just tweet something nice, 3 words, I am sorry.
Our correspondent Dave Lee is in Chico, Northern California, and joins us live on the Newsroom right now. Dave, who has Mr. Trump been meeting and what's he said?
Hi, Rich. Yes, Mr. Trump's had a pretty busy day here. He arrived and he was meted on the tarmac at a nearby airbase by California's governor, Jerry Brown, and also California's governor-elect, Gavin Newsroom, who's going to be taking over here in January. He's also been talking to top officials from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, about precisely what efforts are being undertaken to both continue to control this fire, but also to look after those who now now need shelter and places to stay, and many areas of support to get back on their feet. As he walked around, he kind of backtracked ever so slightly on some of the controversial comments he'd made prior to coming here. As you'll know, that he tweeted in the early stages of the fire, while people were still evacuating, that the reason why the fire occurred was because of bad forest management. And in that tweet, he threatened to cut funding to California because of it. That was a message that came before offering any kind of condolences or comforting words, and he was heavily criticised for that. When he came here earlier, he struck a different tone. He said that this problem needs a lot of funding to solve, and that a lot of funding, he said, would be provided. And that seems to have gone over slightly better. I think, as you mentioned, mixed reaction. But on the whole, I think even people here that disagree strongly with President Trump, of which we've met several, I think they're glad of the attention simply having the president nearby brings to their situation. It brings much higher media profile, and I think people are very keen that people outside of this area see what they're going through in order to get as much support as possible.
Dave, thanks very much for joining us. The BBC's Dave Lee in California. On Friday, it all seemed so clear. The CIA had concluded that the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed... Now to the Central African Republic, where there's fresh hope of an end to years of deadly sectarian violence. The government's agreed a peace deal with 14 of the armed groups operating in the country, after talks in Sudan sponsored by both the United Nations and the AU, the African Union. 6 years of violence in the impoverished country has left thousands dead and more than 1 million people internally displaced. The Secretary-General of the Norwegian Refugee Council, Jan Egeland, has equated the suffering of its people to those in Syria.
You don't see 4-story blocks being leveled to the ground. You see huts being torched. But for the mother who cannot defend her children and who becomes raped and abused, it's the same suffering, but with less attention in those forgotten places.
The peace agreement's due to be formally signed next week, but there remains some trepidation. Several previous agreements have failed to hold. Marshall Van Valen is Associate Editor of the Africa Report.
The people in Khartoum are quite optimistic, but with so many difficult moving parts, a lot of people are very pessimistic.